Today is March the 2nd, 2007. I am Herman's Fauntleroy, and I will be interviewing Mr. Herbert Coulton today related to the civil rights struggle, the civil rights period. Primarily as far as the city of Petersburg is concerned, but as we go into this, I think you'll find that Mr. Coulton was quite involved even outside of Petersburg and worked considerably with Dr. Martin Luther King and the Reverend Y.T. Walker. Mr. Coulton, would you give us some information in reference to the positions that you held as you worked within the SCLC structure?
Surely. I first received a call from Wyatt Walker, who had left Petersburg in 1960. He called me in 1962 and said that SCLC was expanding and wanted to know whether or not I would be interested in working with SCLC. He told me that he had recommended me to Martin Luther King and wanted me to come to Atlanta to be interviewed for a job as field secretary. So I went to Atlanta and was interviewed by Martin Luther King Jr. And he hired me on the spot as a field secretary for SCLC, working in Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. From there, I was promoted in 1964 to the director of affiliates, which we had 432 affiliates in 37 states. And my job was to service these affiliates. However, I had to live and work out of the national office, which was in Atlanta, Georgia. I then left there in 1967 and came back to Virginia. And the reason for that is I had a young son whom I did not know. And I told Dr. King that I would have to go back because in my talking with him that weekend, asking him who I was, the only thing he could tell me that rather than his father, I was man. And that was just too much for me. And I told him I would continue to work with SCLC, but I would have to do it out of Virginia since my wife was still stationed in Petersburg.
Did you at that time move to what we considered as the Petersburg SCLC office?
Yes, at 244 Halifax, I came back to that office. Nobody replaced me when I left going to Atlanta to accept the job as director of affiliates. So it was easier to come back into that same seat, into that same office. So that's what I did.
Well, obviously, you started with considerable activity in terms of being a part of the SCLC structure and working with Martin Luther King directly. What would you say is your first recollection of the violation of civil rights as far as your life is concerned?
I would think 1957, really. I was drafted into the military, taking my basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And when I was finished my basic, I had orders to go to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. For some unknown reason, I was given the meal tickets by a sergeant. And our first stop was Atlanta to eat. Atlanta's airport was nowhere near what it is today. It was sort of dilapidated, but they did have a restaurant, so we stopped and we were to eat lunch in Atlanta, going from Atlanta to Fort Worth, Dallas, Texas, to pick up some more troops, and from there to California, where we would get on a ship and go to Hawaii. At that point, when we got to Atlanta, I showed the captain of the restaurant my meal tickets, and he said, okay, you white fellas, come on with me and you all can eat right in the dining room with everybody else. You colored fellas, wait right here until I can get somebody to help me with a blackboard. And we'll put a blackboard in the restaurant and you all will eat behind the blackboard. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. And he said, well, that's the law. I said, well, we're just breaking that law because we're not going to eat behind the blackboard. And he said, well, that's the law. I don't see how y'all can eat. I said, well, you tell those white fellas that you just told to go into the dining room that if they eat, they will have to pay for it out of their own money. I was not going to use these meal tickets to feed anybody if they were going to discriminate the black soldiers. So they came back real angry with me and said to me, Herb, we just might beat you and take these tickets. And I said, you can beat me, but on the way down, I'm tearing these tickets up. You will not eat in that dining room. And when I got to Atlanta, I got to Hawaii, of course, I was called in by the CO. And CO said, we are prepared to court-martial you. And he said, you violated orders and not allowing these soldiers to eat in Atlanta. You have anything to say for yourself? I said, yes, sir. I said, if the same thing would happen again today, I would do the same thing. And he told me then to report back to your outfit, your unit, and we will process the papers to have you court-martialed. I'm still waiting. 50 years later, nothing really happened. But I just could not take the idea that here we're going to be in the military together, but we couldn't even eat together. Now, Truman passed Executive Order 1448 in 1948 that the armed services would be integrated. And here we were at 57, 9 years later, and we still were being discriminated. And I just took offense to that. There's no way I could handle that.
As an individual under those circumstances, what would you say was the reaction of all of that upon you?
It was kind of rough, in as much as, if you can recall, the Rosa Parks situation in Montgomery, Alabama was just 2 years away. It happened 2 years before this incident happened. And we were reading about it, and many of the people were very upset about that. And I just said, at least I could play a part into that by not allowing this to happen to us. So this is the reason why I did that.
After you return home and receive, I suppose, a discharge from the military at that point in time, about when was it that you had your first contact with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as it relates to becoming a part of that organization?
Well, you know, prior to that, I got out of the military in 1959. I got a job at Central State in 1959, latter part of 1959. And when I got this job, they had a cafeteria out there that was discriminated against. And they built a new cafeteria, and that was segregated. So the whole situation was just segregation. This was years after supposedly things had changed. And I was interested then in voter registration and voter education, and was doing some things at the Blandford Chapel. We would have meetings once a week, and we would get names of those who were not registered to vote, and then we had to encourage them that they have to pay their poll tax. And so we just started a whole thing there. It was really, White Walker had heard from a member who lived in Blanford, who was a member of Guildfield Church, of what we were doing, and he said, well, just keep on. We're going to get something started later. That was before King had come for him. But he had in mind that we're going to have to do something. He had approached the NAACP, actually, concerning his venture at the Petersburg Public Library. And they had a waiting plan and said, you're going to have to wait. And he did not wish to wait and told me to continue to do what I was doing over there. He will get some students and some other people to go to the library. And that's where it all started, at the Petersburg Public Library.
So what you were doing then, if I'm correct, as far as the Blanford area is concerned in Petersburg, really was taking place prior to the time that the effort was made to integrate the Petersburg Public Library.
Correct. Yes.
What type of reaction were you getting from the citizens in that area as you made an effort to assist them, if you will, in terms of becoming registered voters and recognizing the problems that were existing at that time?
Well, some were hesitant, primarily because it was just generally known that when you went upstairs on the third floor to the registrar's office, Gilliam, I think his name was not going to let you pass that test because you had to derive from that paragraph ounces, 10 ounces, in order, or the order that he deemed fit, and you more than likely would fail that test. So we were trying to get them to understand the test, what you were going to have to do. Those were the kind of things we were about. And we tried later on to do some of those same kinds of things in different areas to let them know that this is not just a Blanford thing, but this was a situation where we're going to have to get folks registered to vote to get some things changed.
What was your reaction at the time that Wyatt T. Walker followed through on his position to make an effort to integrate the library as it related to your activities in the city of Petersburg?
Man, I was just happy, I tell you. I never forget, I walked over to Zion Baptist Church that night in reasonably clear weather, and only to discover that when I got there, when I came out there was 8 or 9 inches of snow on the ground. It didn't make no difference at all. We're just happy to be a part of that. I don't know that Zion Baptist has ever had that many people in it since then. I can remember a lawyer whom I lost contact with, Lynn Holt, was there. And Lynn Holt was telling us that we got to continue on. The White Walker remained in jail overnight, but he did this for us. And we've got to take up the banner and continue on with not just voter registration, not with demonstrations to the library, but we got to go down to the 5 and dime stores and other areas of the city, because all of it was segregated.
As I recall, I think that was the first time that Petersburg had seen such a mass meeting as you're describing here, particularly
Yes.
with the weather as it was
Yes.
at that night. What was your reaction to what took place in that mass meeting that night and the end result of that?
You know, that mass meeting was very, very long. It lasted up until around midnight. It really didn't make any difference how long it lasted. It was just interesting. It was just good to be there. And the next day, I can't remember when we got 244 Halifax Street, but I know that Reverend Walker knew Dr. Crowder. And was able to get the upstairs of that building because they had that doctor's office downstairs, really in the old Golden Horseshoe building. But we began to get signs ready because we were going to do a whole onslaught on the whole city. We were going to go to the library, back to the library. We were going to go to the dime stores, the bus stations, everything. So John Long was one of the first ones, and he and Cecil Clark were painting the signs that we use to begin our long, drawn-out demonstrations. They lasted from March until the summertime came. We continued to do it. And some doors were open during that period.
As a result of that particular activity, the mass meeting, the activity that took place in terms of organizing as it relates to picketing and sit-ins and all that went along with that, what do you think what would you say was the reaction from the community when all of that started?
I think that, well, for the most part, they were with us. I know that some people were sort of reluctant, but for the most part, they were really with us, and we were having mass meetings at that time almost every week. We were having mass meetings. We were raising money for jail bonds. We were raising money so that the kids would be able to have sodas or something once they had gone on the picket line or they were coming off the picket line, because we had students from Peabody High School at that time and Virginia State students. We had them both. And we had a professor, not a professor, but a director of food service at Virginia State who was with us. David Gunter was with us, very much a part of the movement, who would be responsible for getting many of the students from Virginia State over to that office where we would demonstrate, starting off there, and then going downtown to the dime stores and later on to the bus stations and whatnot. So that's what it was all about.
You mentioned the involvement of students, particularly Virginia State College at that time students and Peabody High School students, which I guess indicates that the number of people involved really was at the student level at that point in time. What was the involvement of the adults in the city, as you recall?
Not bad when I consider the persons that were, well, as an example, Cassie Walker closed her beauty shop that day and went with Wyatt Walker to the library and got arrested. And there were others there who were with us. There were some, I can remember Dr. William Miles, the late Dr. William Miles, who called the office one day and spoke to me and said, "Herb," said, "I just want you to know I'm with you, but I can't take the nonviolence. What I'll do, I will see that a box of sandwiches will become every day for those students." And every day he sent a box of sandwiches. So the students, rather than have to go home right from school, they would go on the picket line and they would be able to eat right there. So there were contributions that many of those adults made. Some of them were undercover and whatnot, but they were with us.
Who do you recall during that particular period of time would you say were the leaders of the movement?
I think Reverend Wyatt Walker, of course, Reverend R.G. Williams, who was a pastor of Zion Baptist Church. We had Herman's Fauntleroy, his wife Jermaine Fauntleroy were very integral in the movement. And we had David Gunter, who was very much a part of that movement. And of course there were others, but those were the key people, I think, that was doing what they could to continue the movement.
Do you recall any other of the local organizations that became involved in the struggle?
Yeah. The night that we were at Zion Baptist Church for that mass meeting, an organization was organized and called themselves the Petersburg Improvement Association, which later became an affiliate of SLC, but they had a very integral part in the movement at that time. I can't recall now, I don't know if it was R.G. Williams or David Gunner who were the president of that organization. And it lasted for quite some time. There is an article in the Life magazine of September of 1960, and it stated then that Petersburg was perhaps the only city in the nation that were using high school students. Most of the people in the movement were college students up until that time. We started using high school students, Peabody, and they were very, very productive in their coming down each day. Even sometimes we even demonstrated on Sunday. They were right there. And we had some preachers who were with us. Well, I had mentioned Reverend Walker, Reverend Williams, Reverend Reed from First Baptist Church, and there were probably some others that were, but those were the three ones that were really interested in what we were doing.
Thinking about churches, and if we look at what's happening today, there doesn't appear to be the involvement of churches, if you will, as may have existed in some of those years that you've described. What do you recall in terms of the involvement of particularly the black churches in Petersburg during the height of the struggle, if you will?
Unfortunately, we just didn't have what we thought we should have had in terms of productivity from many of the black churches. The ones primarily that we really had was First Baptist, Zion, Guildfield, sometimes Tabernacle, and sometimes Mount Olivet. That was really about it. I might have left out a church or two, but for the most part, these were the ones that we could call on to see whether or not we wanted a mass meeting. We could have it at that church. Those were the churches that would send students. Those were the churches that would raise monies for the movement. I hope I haven't left out many, but that's for the most part were the churches that had total involvement.
Obviously, there were businesses, of course, that where the picketing and the sit-ins took place. Do you recall basically by name any of the businesses, white-owned, operated businesses within the city of Petersburg at that point that really were segregated and took or made every effort, if you will, to deny African Americans an opportunity to either come in or be a part of the regular clientele? As far as
by all means, you had Spiro's, who was definitely anti what we were about. Globe department store had said before they would allow a nigger to come in, they would close their stores. However, blacks were still buying from Globe because Globe had a truck that he would, Mr. Charles Wynn would carry things, and he would tell us who was buying. they would call up. They had, they knew their sizes. They would tell me, send me an overcoat or a suit or whatever. And then later he would tell us that, well, so-and-so was in the store today. I took him a suit or whatever. We knew that. Spiro's just had such a bad attitude about the whole thing that even if we had a meeting with them to talk with them, they were always very, very adamant about that. Might have been others, but I do remember Spiro's and I remember Globe Department Store. For those persons who were really businesses who were really with us in terms of the blackness, I would be remiss if I left out William and Bland. William and Bland Funeral Home was the one who bonded everybody out who was arrested. They didn't initially go to William and Bland. They went to another funeral home who refused to do so. And Bland said, I'll take them all. So he did take them all. We had help from Bland. We had help from Williams and Moody Drugstore. We had help from really O.P. Hare. O.P. Hare could do no less because 90% of that business, maybe 95% of that business, though he was white, the businesses were black. So that's basically what we had working with.
At the time that we're talking about, at this point, of course, most of the businesses that were affected as far as picketing and sit-ins, boycotting were concerned, were retail-type businesses. What do you recall in reference to Petersburg General Hospital as it relates to the situation at that time?
That was a rough act to follow. Petersburg General, we only had, I think it was the second front, where blacks could go. We couldn't go to any other areas there of Petersburg Hospital. I remember what happened one night at First Baptist Church. We were having, I think, some type of service, and we had a member of our church who was having a heart attack. Reverend Reed left the church, had called the ambulance to go pick this lady up at church, and called her doctor, who was black. And this was a good time to try to get this woman in the hospital with a heart attack. And we had begged this doctor, please don't send this woman to Richmond, whereas en route to Richmond, she could have died. But he insisted on sending her to Richmond because he didn't want to tackle what was facing him at the hospital. So she too had to go to the, but then too, when we would interview and go into the hospital and look around, they would always, for some reason, the federal government would always let them know when we were coming. So when we came, everything looked bright. They had changed the draperies and had nice sheets and all. And workers told us when we left, they took all that down and business was as usual. So we also we performed some civil disobedience there, not as much as we should have, whereby we would get down and block the entrances of the hospital. That was a tough act. They weren't about, I think the administrator at that time was Bokinski, I think his name was. And he was very adamant and wanted to keep the status quo. We also had another one which was just as bad, was Holiday Inn. They would not allow blacks to go in to eat in there or to get rooms in there. It was a time that there were those from Virginia State, and I hate to mention this, but there were those from Virginia State who felt that they could go in there. They were sort of a little above us, and later they were dismissed, but they had gone in and were eating. But that was stopped until later that they began to open up, because with the pickets that we did there, the home office of Holiday Inn pressure was put on them from other areas, and we were not the only ones who wanted to go in. So as a result, they had an order to integrate, so to integrate the whole system of Holiday Inns, and that was it. But that was not without a fight.
Within the city of Petersburg, and I'm well aware of the fact that you are a native Petersburger, if you will, what's your opinion of what the status and the atmosphere and the environment of our police department was at that time?
That was very tough, because we had no blacks on the police force. We didn't even know when young men, I don't think no young women tried at the time, but young men went down there to apply. We didn't know whether or not they'd passed the test or not, because the administrator was, and the administration was all white, and I guess they would allow those who wanted to apply, but they were probably informed that we did not pass. I did not have, and I think most of the people who were leaders did not feel that we had a very good police department. I remember so well when the young lady, I think her name was Walton, was found in that well, but prior to her being found, instead of looking for them themselves, the police, the James A. Street Club, which was a club, men's club of First Baptist Church, we had the very first search. And I can remember the police department calling my house and saying, when are y'all going to have a search? And if so, can we tag along with you? This is something for a police department to say when a child has been missing, that they didn't initiate the first search, we did, and they wanted to go along with us. But the police force was not one of those positions in an organization that we cherished.
Based on conversation that we're having here at this point in time, what is your opinion in reference to the status, if you will, and conditions and the environment within the city of Petersburg as it was compared, if you will, to what was transpiring during the period that we've just discussed? Today, what would you say it is today versus that period?
There's an old saying that says, everything has changed, hyphen, and nothing has changed. If we don't watch it, things will go back to revert back to what they were. And I think here that we have to be very careful that this does not happen. I can remember when we didn't have very much to be proud of, when everything was white. George Washington was saying could come back to Petersburg and he could recognize everything here, because nothing had changed. Things have changed now, but if we don't watch it, they might revert back to how they were. We do have some positions that we have not had before, but I'm not sure that these positions will be ones that will hold up and stand the test if certain things happen.
We have not talked about our school system, and I'm talking about it from the perspective of an segregated versus integrated school system. What do you recall in terms of the differences as related to our school system in the city of Petersburg during the period that we've described here, as it relates to black students being able to benefit from an education that we would say was on par with what may have been taking place at a school such as Petersburg High School?
I've had some real problems with the school system. I still believe, and if we go back a little ways, I've had some problems really with how certain positions were being filled. I can remember we had a superintendent for years who was named the Dean of Superintendents. John Meade was the Dean of Superintendents. He stayed here for nearly, I guess, close to 40 years as superintendent of schools here. And when he died, we had a black man coming in whom I thought could have made a good superintendent. However, I remember the words he said, that he didn't feel worthy to sit where he sat. And that's almost like talking about Jesus. And John Meade was long ways from being a Jesus, but that's the way he seemed to have felt about him. Also, along with the fact that we've had some superintendents who seem to be working for a salary rather than working to help the children. And this includes the last one that we had. I just have some problems with that kind of administration and that kind of structure whereby we didn't seem to be that concerned about doing some good, positive things for our children. I've had problems with that. I want to go back a little ways and say something here that you may or may not agree with, but I can remember years ago when Herman Fauntleroy asked John Meade, who was the superintendent of schools, would it be all right if teachers would run for positions in the city, such as city councilman? And I think at that time, John Meade said yes. Fauntleroy ran and won. And I think the day afterwards was told that the rules have changed, that there's conflict of interest. We could not have a teacher who is on the city council. You have to make your choice of whether or not you're going to accept city council job or your teaching position. And Fauntleroy didn't take him long to say, if people thought enough of me to elect me, I'm going to take the councilman's position, and he did. Of course, he lost his teaching job. Don't think he ever taught anymore, ever. But the citizens of Petersburg, at least for 2 or 3 months, was able to pay his salary, whatever he was making as a teacher, because he surely was not going to be making that much as a council person. But and I thought that was an heroic act that I've always felt had been sort of played down. That maybe Fauntleroy didn't want to tell that story or make mention of that, but I think that's a fact, and I think that's part of history, and that's a part that need really to have been told.
What else, if at this point, if anything you might want to say about Petersburg in terms of where we are today and you've already at least alluded to some of this, but what do we need to do to really, really cause the city to begin to fully recognize African Americans in this city as we refer to first-class citizens?
I think that so much needs to change. I think, I don't know really what's happening in our churches. I don't know whether or not we're telling the story. I remember going to the High Street Methodist Church, and it was turned down. It was all white. I know, I can't remember everybody who went with, but I know David Gunter and I went to that church. And David Gunter said to the usher, if Jesus would come here, could he come in? The usher went up to the pastor and asked the pastor. And the pastor said, oh, let him come in. I ain't got no answer for that. Let him come in. So we went in. But just as that happened, I'm certain that there are a lot of things that could happen, even in the black church, that is not happening. We had Black History the whole month of February in our church. Every Sunday, something was taking place constructively. I don't know how many other churches were doing that. I'm not saying that we, the First Baptist, the only church that did that. But I think more of that needs to happen. I even was in a session yesterday with Elva Hollins, who has a tutorial program with a grant that's at First Baptist. She asked me to talk about Black history, though it was March 1st. But we talked about it. It's amazing that we've got to teach our children some things, that they've got to lift their heads up. They got to feel good about their blackness. And I think that's one of the real problems. They don't feel good about it. A black cat was a bad guy. The black sheep was the bad guy. Everything black. A black lie was a bad lie. I remember there's a song years ago when I was a little boy. I heard that song. Never forget it. The moon was on a glow and heaven was in your eyes the night that you told me those little white lies. That was a white guy talking to his girlfriend who was white. She told a white lie. She didn't tell a black lie, because a black lie is worse than that. Even in our bakeries, we have problems. An angel cake was white. A devil cake was black. And our kids got this thing in their minds about that. You have never seen a woman walk down the aisle in a black gown. Nor have you ever seen a baby wrapped in a black blanket. I have never seen a black blanket in my life. Even when we talk about Christ, it's a situation where the white artist depicted Christ as being a blonde-haired, white, blue-eyed man. And that's what you see. Very few houses got a black Jesus in it. Santa Claus, a big white, rosy-cheeked white man. When a black man put on a Santa Claus suit, it's almost like Halloween. The kids are afraid of him. So I think we got to turn that around, that kids can see and be proud of their blackness. I think that's one of the things that they're really going to have to do. And I think here that we're going to have to come together on some real items when it comes to our city, that we've got to turn away from what's happening downtown, what's happening, I can't think of the name of the area now, but Bolingbrook, Old Street and all, there's some areas up here in Petersburg, there's some areas that we need to think in terms of about the Avenue and Halifax Street and the like. And that has not been so. And I think that until we do that, until we can see where our blackness leads us, and be proud of that, and the positions that we now hold in the city, would be something more than just a salary, but actually trying to help some people and try to make Petersburg what Petersburg really ought to be.
Well, Mr. Coulton, and if I may at this point in time, I'll just say Herbert,
Yeah.
since I know you rather well. I think that's a good point and a good place to end our discussion, if you will. I think your statement was such that it had a lot of meaning. I really appreciate the fact that you've taken your time to come and share with us today. You have, of course, been quite involved, and you know much about what Petersburg was and what it is or is not today. And I think you have spoken to that. So again, thanks for being here, thanks for coming, and thanks for sharing with us.
You're quite welcome. We failed to mention at all, and I forgot, the Wilcox Lake thing. Yeah. It really should have been something said about that Wilcox Lake. Were you here about the Wilcox Lake thing?